The envelope contained $50,000 and a single condition: disappear from my son's life forever. She took the money. She built an empire. And years later, he would stare up at her face on a billboard, realizing his mother had paid off the love of his life. This is the story of Choi Min-jun, heir to a Seoul cosmetic empire, and Amara Jones, the aspiring beautician he loved. It's about a mother's ruthless calculus to protect her legacy, and the one decision that would spawn two rival beauty giants locked in a silent war for decades. The question was never whether she would take the money, but what she would build after she walked away. In 2007, Seoul was a city gleaming with new wealth, and the Choi family's Glow Group was its beauty crown jewel, built not on glamour, but on a very specific promise: conformity. For 3 generations, they sold a singular ideal of porcelain perfection, a standard so narrow it became synonymous with Korean beauty itself. At its helm was Madame Choi Yoon-jae, a widow in her 60s whose elegance was a cultivated weapon. She hadn't just protected the empire after her husband's death. She had tripled its worth by understanding that aspiration, tightly controlled, was the most profitable product of all. Her only son, Min-jun, was her masterpiece and her dilemma. In his late 20s, he possessed the boardroom gravity of a man twice his age, yet he carried a quiet rebellion in his eyes. He had studied at Stanford, not just business, but biochemistry, returning with ideas about inclusive beauty lines and global markets that made his mother's advisors shift uncomfortably in their seats. His vision was the company's future. His heart, however, was about to become its greatest liability. He met Amara Jones on a rainy Tuesday in Itaewon. She was 24, an American exchange student finishing a master in cosmetic science, paying her tuition by working at a niche boutique that catered to expats and mixed-race Koreans. Min-jun had wandered in, researching a competitor. He found Amara patiently explaining to a frustrated customer why foundation formulas from the local pharmacies turned ashy on deeper skin tones. She wasn't just selling a product. She was delivering a 5-minute masterclass in undertones and lipid barriers, her hands moving with a precise, practical grace. He was captivated, not by pity or novelty, but by expertise. He bought 3 mismatched products just to keep the conversation going. Their first date was a debate over hyaluronic acid derivatives. Their second, a shared lab session where she showed him her independent formulations, creams and serums blended in her tiny apartment kitchen, designed for melanin-rich skin that the mainstream market ignored. To Min-jun, she was a revelation, a brilliant mind operating outside the system he was trapped in. To Amara, he was genuinely curious, a listener in a world of talkers. Their relationship grew in stolen hours between his shareholder meetings and her late-night study sessions, a secret world of shared ambition. In a city like Seoul, and in an industry as small as beauty, secrets are a currency that others quickly spend. A paparazzo photo, grainy but clear, published in a tabloid, Choi Min-jun laughing, his hand on the arm of a black woman outside a modest cafe. The caption was coy, but the damage was seismic. At the Choi family compound in Gangnam, Madame Choi did not raise her voice. She placed the magazine on her rosewood desk, smoothed its page, and saw not a romance, but a corporate threat. A black girlfriend was not just a personal scandal. It was a direct contradiction to the Glow Group brand, a crack in the pristine image of homogeneity they sold. It signaled confusion to their core consumer, the conservative Korean auntie who bought their flagship serum like a religious offering. It was, in her calculus, an existential risk. The pressure began as a gentle redirect. Introductions to daughters of board members, sudden mandatory trips to factory sites in Busan during Amara's birthdays. Min-jun resisted. The pressure hardened. Whispers at the club about the company's falling value, about a son who prioritized personal whims over fiduciary duty. Articles planted about the importance of legacy and pure lineage. Through it all, Amara felt the change. The friendly smiles from Min-jun's friends tightened. Public outings became strained, watched. She was a problem to be solved, and she could feel the solve approaching. The meeting was not in the corporate office, but in the formal sitting room of the Gangnam compound, a room designed to humble. Madame Choi, in a hanbok of muted silk, did not offer tea. She offered a manila envelope placed on the table between them with finality. $50,000, American, a significant sum for a student, Madam Choi began, her voice as cool as marble. "It represents an investment in your future, Miss Jones, a future elsewhere. You are an intelligent woman. You must see the impossibility of your current path. My son's destiny is here, welded to this family, to this company. You are a distraction he can ill afford. This affection will destroy everything his ancestors built." Amara sat, her back straight, listening to the clinical dissection of her love as a strategic nuisance. The offer was not framed as cruelty, but as a business transaction, the clean, efficient removal of a liability. "Take it," Madam Choi continued, a note of steel entering her tone. "Build a life far from here, or stay and watch as every door closes for him. The board will vote him out. The banks will call their loans. I have nurtured this company from a seedling. I will not let it be uprooted for a passing infatuation. The choice, Miss Jones, is yours. Be the ruin of him or be smart." She slid the envelope across the polished wood. It stopped an inch from Amara's hands. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the distant hum of Seoul's traffic. Amara looked at the envelope, then at the impassive face of the woman who held her boyfriend's world in her hands. Every instinct told her to throw it back, to make a scene of defiant pride. But Amara was a scientist. She assessed data. She calculated outcomes. The look in Madam Choi's eyes promised not just personal defeat, but the systematic destruction of Minjun's dreams. Her love was the weapon that would be used to break him. And so, in that terrible, quiet moment, she did not see an insult. She saw seed capital. She reached out, and she took the envelope. Madam Choi allowed herself a single, slow nod of satisfaction. The problem was solved. Amara stood, the envelope heavy in her grasp, and walked out without another word. She boarded a flight to New York 2 days later. She left a short, careful letter for Minjun, saying she had to pursue her own path, that their worlds were too different. She gave no forwarding address. She erased herself completely. When Minjun received the letter, he confronted his mother. She met his fury with serene denial. "She saw the reality, Minjun. She was not as invested as you were. She chose an easier path. Now you must choose yours." He searched desperately, but Amara had vanished as if she'd never existed. Heartbroken and disillusioned, he eventually submerged himself in the work, becoming the dutiful CEO, a colder, sharper version of his former self, all while believing the woman he loved had simply walked away. Meanwhile, in a cramped Brooklyn apartment, Amara Jones opened a fresh notebook. On the first page, she wrote a new company name. Then, she opened the manila envelope, stacked the bills on her kitchen table, and began. $50,000 sounds like a fortune until you're trying to build a company from scratch in New York City. It vanished quickly. First and last month's rent on a 700-square-foot apartment in Bed-Stuy that doubled as a lab, incorporation fees, liability insurance, and the raw materials for her first small batch. Amara worked 3 jobs: bartending at a lounge in Soho, freelance cosmetic consulting, and overnight shifts at a 24-hour copy center to use their industrial printer for her early packaging prototypes. She slept 4 hours a night, her life reduced to a relentless equation of time versus capital. Every setback was filtered through the memory of Madam Choi's dismissive gaze. This was not just about building a business. It was about building a monument to the worth she had been told she didn't have. Her first product line was born from sheer necessity and rage. She called it Chromatica, a 12-shade foundation system for deep skin tones, each named after a different city with a vibrant black diaspora: Dakar, Kingston, Atlanta, Brixton. The chemistry was her masterpiece, a formula that countered ashiness with a patented blend of light-reflecting minerals and moisturizing agents derived from African shea butter. She mixed the first 50 bottles herself on her kitchen counter, the glass gleaming under the single fluorescent light. Selling them was another matter. Sephora's buyer took one look at her pitch and said, "The market for this is too niche." A venture capitalist, after hearing her out, leaned back and said, "Interesting. Do you have any data that women of color will pay premium prices?" The rejection was a constant hum, so she took to the streets, literally. She set up a pop-up booth at the African Street Festival in Harlem. For 3 days, she demonstrated her foundation on anyone who would sit in her chair. The transformation on women's faces, the shock of seeing their skin matched perfectly for the first time, created a ripple. Word of mouth spread through beauty blogs and YouTube channels run by Black influencers who were desperate for products that actually worked. An editor from Allure magazine, stumbling upon the buzz, featured Chromatica in their Undiscovered Gems column. That article was the spark. Her website crashed from the traffic. All 50 bottles sold in 4 hours. The waiting list grew to 10,000 names. Back in Seoul, the Glow Group was entering its golden age. Under Minjun's driven leadership, they had expanded into China and Southeast Asia, their marketing campaigns featuring ethereal Korean celebrities floating through cherry blossoms. The company's value soared, but Minjun felt hollow, a ghost in his own gleaming corridors. He dated sparingly, women approved by his mother's social secretary, each encounter a polite transaction that left him cold. He channeled all his energy into work, into growing an empire that felt increasingly like a gilded cage. Madame Choi, watching him, mistook his silent efficiency for acceptance. She believed her solution had been clean, surgical, and complete. She had no idea that the first crack in her perfect world would appear not in a boardroom, but on a fashion blog. In 2012, a popular Korean-American style influencer living in New York posted a glowing review titled, "Finally, my skin found its match." The post featured side-by-side photos of her wearing Glow Group's Porcelain Illusion foundation, which turned her gray, and Amara's Chromatica in the shade Kingston, which melted seamlessly into her skin. The blogger wrote, "It's not just a better product. It feels like a company that sees me." The post went semi-viral within the Korean diaspora community. A junior brand manager at Glow Group's international division, tasked with monitoring social sentiment, flagged it and sent it up the chain. It landed on the desk of the head of global marketing, who, seeing no immediate threat from a niche American brand, filed it away. But one copy of that report was also sent, as per protocol, to the executive suite. Minjun's assistant placed the weekly digital sentiment folder on his desk every Friday afternoon. Buried on page 17 of that week's report was a small thumbnail of the blog post. Minjun, skimming, almost missed it, but the name Chromatica snagged his eye. It was unusual. He clicked the link, he read the review, and then he scrolled to the About the Founders section at the bottom of the brand's website. There was no photo, just a brief bio. Amara Jones, founder and head chemist, is a graduate of the University of Michigan's Cosmetic Science program and a former researcher focused on inclusive pigment technology. The world tilted. The air left the room. Jones, Amara, it couldn't be. It was a common name. But the specific field, the timing, a cold, electric certainty flooded his veins. He instructed his assistant to cancel his next meeting. He spent the night in his office, the Seoul skyline twinkling mockingly outside, digging through every public trace of Chromatica. He read every article, every comment, parsed the ingredient lists that were published online. The scientific elegance of the formulations had her fingerprints all over them. This was her mind, materialized. She hadn't vanished into obscurity, she had built a lighthouse. A storm of emotions hit him, elation that she was alive and thriving, a gut-wrenching pain at the years lost, and a fury so deep it was quiet. His mother's words echoed, "She chose an easier path." The lie was breathtaking. Confrontation was not a meeting, it was an ambush. He walked into his mother's private sitting room at the compound the next morning, his tablet in hand. He didn't sit. He opened the blog post and turned the screen to her. "Explain this." Madame Choi adjusted her reading glasses, her face a mask of placid curiosity that slowly hardened into granite as she read. The silence stretched, thick and dangerous. "A coincidence," she said finally, her voice even. "A woman with some talent, leveraging a trend. It has nothing to do with us." "You paid her," Minjun stated, the words not a question but an accusation laid bare. $50,000 to disappear. That was the investment she used to start this. "Nonsense," she replied, but the denial lacked its usual force. She removed her glasses, a deliberate, slow motion. "I offered her a gift, a severance. She took it voluntarily. If she used it to start a cottage business, that is her prerogative. It does not change the fundamental truth. She was not suited for this life, for your life. Look at what she's building, it's for them. It is a direct repudiation of our standards. She is proving my point for me." Her calm reframing of betrayal into vindication was a masterclass in emotional warfare. Minjun saw the entire architecture of his past 5 years, the grief, the isolation, his submerged self, and understood it was built on this single, calculated deceit. The company he had poured his soul into was the altar on which his personal happiness had been sacrificed. "You broke me," he said, his voice terrifyingly quiet, "to protect a brand." "I protected your future," she snapped, her composure cracking for a single, revealing instant. "I protected everything. This sentimentality would have ruined you. Look at what you have achieved without that distraction." "What I have achieved," he echoed, looking around the opulent room that felt suddenly like a tomb. "I have to go." "Where?" Her voice was sharp, maternal command returning. "To see," he said, already moving toward the door, "if my future is still in the room you locked me out of." He boarded a flight to New York that evening, giving no explanation to his board or his assistants. He was a man possessed, operating on a single directive: find her. But New York is a vast city, and Amara Jones was no longer the struggling student. Chromatica had moved out of her apartment. It now operated from a small, sleek studio in Industry City, Brooklyn, employing a staff of 10. She had become deliberately careful, her public persona focused solely on the brand, her personal life shrouded. He called the number listed on the website, only to reach a cheerful customer service representative. He went to the Brooklyn address, but it was a secure warehouse and office space. He was turned away at the lobby. His desperation grew. He hired a private investigator. The report that came back was a shock. Amara Jones was successful, yes, but she was also reportedly seeing someone, a well-respected black dermatologist named David Miller, who had invested in her second round of funding and was frequently seen at industry events with her. The photos, grainy but clear, showed them laughing at a rooftop party, his hand on the small of her back. The pain was acute, a physical blow. He had arrived 5 years too late. The empire his mother had protected had cost him the woman he loved, and she had not only survived without him, she had potentially moved on. He was sitting in a hotel bar in Midtown, staring at the investigator's photos when his phone buzzed. It was his mother's personal secretary. The message was terse: "Urgent board matter. Return immediately. Your unauthorized absence has been noted." The gilded cage's door was clanging shut, recalling its runaway bird. He had a choice: to storm Amara's studio, to force a confrontation that might only bring more pain, or to return to Seoul and face the corporate war his departure had undoubtedly triggered. He closed the photos. He paid his tab. He booked a return flight, a different kind of resolve crystallizing within him. If he could not have her, he would dismantle the machine that had kept them apart. But first, he needed to regain control of his own kingdom. The battle for the Glow Group began not with a shout, but with a spreadsheet. Minjun returned to Seoul and walked into a board meeting already in session, called by his mother to address his erratic behavior. He did not apologize. He placed a forensic audit report on the table, commissioned quietly over the past year, detailing several of his mother's pet philanthropic projects as poorly disguised vehicles for funneling company funds to family-controlled shell companies. The numbers were small in the grand scheme, but the breach of fiduciary duty was undeniable. The room, filled with elders loyal to his mother's legacy, froze. It was a nuclear option, burning the family's private corruption to scorch the earth between him and his parent. "I am the CEO," he stated, his voice devoid of all warmth. "Either this board supports active leadership, or it explains these disbursements to the financial regulators. The choice is yours." Madame Choi, seated at the opposite end of the table, looked at her son as if seeing a stranger. The obedient heir was gone, replaced by a cold, formidable adversary. She had created this version of him, and now he was using her own tactics against her. To avoid a public scandal that would tank the stock, the board voted to reaffirm Minjun's executive powers. Madame Choi was gently, firmly moved to the ceremonial role of chairperson emeritus, her operational controls severed in one stroke. The victory was Pyrrhic. The company was his, but the house was divided, and his mother's allies within the ranks became a silent, simmering opposition. With his authority cemented, Minjun pivoted with brutal speed. He announced Glow Group 2, a radical diversification plan. He slashed the budget for the traditional porcelain beauty ad campaigns and created a new subsidiary, Glow Spectrum. Its mission: to develop and market inclusive beauty lines for global, diverse markets. The internal memos were clear. They were going to compete directly in the Chromatica space. To his team, it was a bold business move. To him, it was a bridge, a desperate, multi-million-dollar attempt to build something that might one day bring him back to her. Across the ocean, Amara's empire was hitting its own inflection point. Chromatica was no longer a niche darling, it was a phenomenon. A feature in Vogue dubbed it the Foundation Revolution. Major retailers came knocking. The partnership offer from a global beauty conglomerate was for $75 million. It was everything she had worked for, a validation that could secure her legacy forever. But it came with a condition. The parent company would control product formulation and marketing. The soul of her brand, the specific, personal chemistry she'd built in her kitchen, would be diluted for mass production. David, the dermatologist investor and her now serious boyfriend, urged her to take the deal. This is the exit dream, Amara, you've won. Sitting in her Brooklyn office, staring at the term sheet, she felt a profound hollowing. The money was a number. The victory felt empty. The entire drive of her life had been fueled by a silent, screaming rebuttal to a woman in a silk hanbok, and that woman had no idea Amara even existed anymore. Was this the endgame? To sell her defiance to a faceless corporation? She surprised everyone, including David, by turning the offer down. She would secure a smaller, independent round of funding instead, maintaining control. The tension from that decision created the first real fracture in her personal life. Meanwhile, Minjun's Glow Spectrum was floundering. His chemists, brilliant as they were, could not reverse engineer Chromatica's magic. Their prototypes were good, but not groundbreaking. Market testing showed tepid responses. The old guard at Glow Group whispered that this was proof. The sun's radical vision was a costly fantasy. Desperate for a breakthrough, Minjun authorized a corporate intelligence push, a legal but aggressive analysis of Chromatica's public strategy. The report contained an unexpected personal footnote. The founder, Amara Jones, was rumored to have turned down a major acquisition to retain independence, a move that had caused strain with her lead investor and rumored partner, Dr. David Miller. A strange, desperate hope flickered in Minjun. Strain meant an opening, not to swoop in but to communicate, to offer something pure. He devised a plan that was either genius or corporate suicide. He would not try to copy her. He would try to partner with her. He drafted a proposal himself, not as Choi Minjun of Glow Group, but as the Minjun who once debated hyaluronic acid with her in a rainy cafe. The offer was unprecedented, a 50-50 joint venture between Chromatica and Glow Spectrum. She would retain full creative control of her brand. His company would provide the manufacturing scale and Asian distribution network she could never build alone. It was a white flag and a peace treaty wrapped in a business proposal. He sent it through official channels, his heart in his throat. The proposal landed in Amara's inbox with a generic subject line. She almost deleted it, assuming it was another clumsy acquisition attempt. But the sender domain gave her pause. Glowscoop.co.kr, her blood ran cold. She opened it. As she read, the polished words blurred, and all she could see was the ghost of the young man she'd loved, speaking through the language of M and A. The offer was shockingly fair, respectful. It was also a trap. It had to be. This was Madame Choi's final move, a way to absorb and neutralize the threat. She drafted a one-line rejection: "We are not interested in any partnership at this time." But before she could hit send, David walked in. He saw the proposal on her screen, recognized the Glow Group logo, and his face darkened. "Are you serious? After everything, this is the family that paid you off like a servant." His protectiveness felt like possession. In that heated moment, Amara realized a painful truth. David saw her story as a wound he needed to avenge. Minjun's proposal, flawed and dangerous as it was the first communication in years that addressed her not as a victim or a novelty, but as a peer, a queen with a kingdom. She didn't send the rejection. She closed the laptop. "I need to think." This indecision was the crack through which chaos entered. One of Madame Choi's remaining loyalists in the Glow Group IT department, aware of the extraordinary proposal, leaked it to a major Korean business newspaper. The headline exploded the next morning: "Glow Group Heir Seeks Alliance with Niche US Rival." The article framed it as a desperate move by Min Jun to save his flailing diversification project. But the subtext was juicy gossip. Why was the famously private Choi heir so personally invested in this small American brand? In Seoul, the board was apoplectic. In Brooklyn, David was furious, convinced Amara's hesitation had invited the scandal. And in the Gangnam compound, Madame Choi saw the final piece of her worst nightmare fall into place. Her son was not just defying her, he was publicly courting the very symbol of his rebellion. The woman had become a corporate entity, a competitor, and now a potential partner. She could not pay off a corporation, but she could destroy one. She made one phone call to the head of a major chemical supply consortium, a man who owed his fortune to Glow Group's patronage. 2 days later, Chromatica's primary supplier of a key patented emulsifier suddenly faced a production delay, citing force majeure. It was a bottleneck designed to cripple Amara's ability to fulfill her massive back-to-school orders. At the same time, a smear campaign bubbled up on Korean beauty forums, whispers that Chromatica's formulas were not tested for Asian skin, that they caused breakouts, that the brand was anti-Korean beauty. The attacks were vague, anonymous, and devastatingly effective in the market Min Jun had hoped to open for her. Amara's company was under siege. She now faced a supply chain crisis and a brewing international PR disaster. Staring at the chaos, the source was obvious. It was the envelope again. This was the true cost of that $50,000, not a one-time payment, but a lifetime of warfare. She realized then that running a successful company wasn't enough. She had to win the war, and to do that, she needed to step onto the battlefield she'd fled. She needed to go to Seoul. She booked a flight. She did not tell David. She packed a single suitcase, and inside it, alongside her presentation materials, was the original empty manila envelope, kept all these years as a quiet reminder. Her plan was not to plead or to confront Min Jun. Her plan was to do what she should have done a decade ago, look Madame Choi in the eye, not as a supplicant, but as an equal force. She would secure her own supply lines, face down the rumors, and claim her place in the market, with or without Glow Group's help. The plane touched down at Incheon International Airport on a blindingly bright Tuesday morning. As her car entered the highway toward the city, a massive digital billboard rotated into view. It was a Glow Group advertisement for their new failing Spectrum line. The model's face was pale, ethereal, and utterly familiar in its generic beauty. Amara looked away, out the other window, and that's when she saw it. On the opposite side of the highway, facing the incoming traffic from the airport, was a billboard for a popular international tech company. But plastered across it, as part of a Global Innovators campaign, was a larger-than-life photograph of her. It was a candid shot from her Vogue feature, her head thrown back in laughter, her skin glowing, the Chromatica logo discreetly in the corner. The car sped past, but the image was seared into her mind. She was here in their city, and her face was already watching over them. She didn't know that at that exact moment, stuck in traffic in his chauffeured sedan on his way to a crisis board meeting, Choi Min-jun looked up and through his sunroof saw the same billboard. He saw her face, triumphant and free, towering over the Seoul skyline. The woman his mother paid to vanish was now the specter haunting their every move. The war was no longer corporate. It was profoundly, deeply personal, and it was just beginning. Amara did not go to a hotel. She went straight to the Glow Group headquarters. She walked into the soaring, marble-clad lobby, a solitary figure with a carry-on bag, and presented her business card to the stunned receptionist. Amara Jones of Chromatica, I am here for a meeting with Madame Choi Yoon-jae. There was no meeting scheduled, of course, but the name Chromatica, spoken with calm authority in the heart of the enemy's stronghold, triggered a silent panic. Calls were made. After 20 minutes of waiting under the curious gaze of employees, the head of corporate communications, a flustered man in his 50s, descended. Miss Jones, what a surprise. Madame Choi is not available, but if you would like to discuss business, perhaps with our strategic partnerships team. I will see Madame Choi, Amara interrupted, her voice even. Or I will hold a press conference on the steps of this building in 1 hour to discuss your company's recent attempts to sabotage my supply chain and defame my brand. Your choice. The bluff was absolute, and it worked. Within minutes, she was escorted to a private elevator that ascended to the exclusive upper floors. She was shown into a small, formal meeting room, not the grand sitting room of the compound. A power play. Amara didn't sit. She stood at the window, looking down at the city that had once expelled her. The door opened. Madame Choi entered, dressed in a sharp modern pantsuit, her silver-streaked hair impeccable. She was alone. The two women looked at each other across a decade of calculated silence. "You are bold," Madame Choi said, not moving from the doorway, "to come here." "You left me no other venue," Amara replied, turning from the window. "The anonymous forums, the supply blockages, it's clumsy, beneath you." A faint, cold smile. "I protect what is mine. You are a threat to my family's legacy. You always were." "Your legacy is a product," Amara said, stepping closer. "A lie you sold. I am not a threat to it. I am the proof that it's obsolete." She reached into her bag and placed the worn, empty manila envelope on the conference table. "You bought my absence. You did not buy my silence or my ambition, and you certainly didn't buy my failure." Madame Choi's eyes flickered to the envelope, a crack in her armor. She had not expected the physical artifact. "You took the money." "I earned every penny of it," Amara shot back. "And I built something you could never understand, loyalty. Not from fear or aspiration, but from seeing people who had been unseen. You have customers, Madame Choi. I have a community, and that is why you will lose." The door burst open. Minjun stood there, his face pale, having clearly run from his office. He looked from his mother to Amara, the air electric with history and fury. "What is this?" "Your mother and I are concluding our business," Amara said, her gaze not leaving Madame Choi. "The war is over. I'm not here to negotiate a surrender. I'm here to declare my independence. You will cease all interference with my suppliers. You will retract the planted rumors, or I will take the evidence I have to every major news outlet in Asia and America. I will not just be the founder who got away. I will be the founder who exposed the rotten core of the Glow Group." Minjun stepped fully into the room, closing the door behind him. "She doesn't have the authority to make that deal," he said, his voice low. Madame Choi turned a glacial stare on her son. "You have made your allegiances quite clear." "I have," he said, meeting her gaze. Then he looked at Amara, and his entire being seemed to soften at the edges. "But she's right. The interference stops. Today," he addressed his mother. "You will issue the retractions. You will make the calls to the supply consortium, or I will call an emergency shareholder meeting and present a motion for your complete removal from the board, with cause. The audit materials are still fresh." It was a checkmate. Madame Choi saw it. Her son and the woman she had exiled were now aligned against her. The empire she had protected had produced its own executioner. The defiance in her eyes dimmed, replaced by the cold realization of defeat. Without another word, she turned and left the room, her posture rigid, her exit a silent concession. The room was suddenly, intensely quiet. Minjun and Amara were alone for the first time in over a decade. The years of hurt, of longing, of separate lives hung between them. "You saw the billboard," Amara finally said. "I saw you," he replied. He took a tentative step closer. "The proposal, it was real, it wasn't a tactic." "I know," she whispered. "I almost said yes." "Why didn't you?" "Because I needed to stand here first, in this room, on my own." She looked around, then back at him. "I heard about your board coup, burning your own house down." "It was built on a lie," he said, his voice rough. "Everything was. I am so sorry, Amara, for not fighting harder, for not knowing." "You couldn't have known." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I heard other things too, that you're seeing a dermatologist." "He's an investor," she said quickly, then sighed. "He was more. It's complicated. It's over. It ended when I got on the plane." She met his eyes. "Some things you leave behind for good. Other things," she trailed off. "Follow you across the ocean," he finished. They didn't embrace. The chasm was too wide, too deep with corporate stakes and personal wreckage. But a bridge, fragile and new, had been built in that confrontation. They talked for an hour in that sterile room, not as star-crossed lovers, but as two CEOs who shared a devastating history and a connected future. They agreed to a truce. No partnership, not yet, but a non-aggression pact. Glow Spectrum would be quietly folded. Chromatica would have safe passage to establish its own independent distribution in Asia. With Minjun's personal guarantee, against further sabotage. As she prepared to leave, Amara picked up the manila envelope. She held it out to him. "You should have this." He took it, his fingers brushing hers. "What do I do with it?" "Whatever you need to," she said. "It's just paper now." He walked her to the lobby, a publicly visible gesture that sent whispers racing through the company. At the entrance, she turned. "Will you be okay with her?" "I have the company," he said. "She has the past. We'll find a new balance." He paused. "Will you come back to Seoul, I mean, for business?" She smiled, a real, weary, hopeful smile. "I have a feeling I'll be back." The resolution was not a fairy tale. Amara returned to New York and navigated the painful but necessary final split with David, who could not understand why she wouldn't crush the Choi's when she had the chance. Chromatica's Asian launch, 6 months later, was a stunning success, widely reported as a triumph of authentic branding. Madame Choi, true to her word, remained silent, retreating into the background of Seoul high society, a queen in exile. The gossip about the son and the American founder flared and then faded, becoming one of those enduring industry legends. And then 2 years later, a photograph surfaced in a business magazine. It was from a charity gala in Singapore for sustainable manufacturing. There, at a corner table, were Choi Min-jun and Amara Jones. They were not touching. They were leaning in, deep in conversation, his head tilted toward hers, her hands animated as she made a point. The caption simply identified them as industry leaders. But the look on their faces was not of corporate negotiation. It was the look of two people who had found their way back to a conversation that had been interrupted a lifetime ago, picking it up exactly where they left off. The final surprise was not in a grand gesture, but in a quiet filing with regulatory agencies a year after that. Chromatica and a newly reformed, smaller division of Glow Group announced a joint green chemistry research initiative, a 50-50 investment into developing next-generation sustainable pigments. The press release quoted both CEOs. It was pure business, but those who knew how to read between the lines saw the truth. It was the first brick in a new foundation. They were not building a merger. They were building something slower, more careful, and entirely their own. The envelope had been paid in full, the debt settled not with revenge, but with a hard-won, complicated peace. The billboard had been just a signpost, pointing the way to a future neither of them could have imagined in that silent sitting room, but that they were now, patiently, walking toward together. So what is the true currency of a story like this? It's easy to frame it as a revenge fantasy, the spurned lover who takes the money and builds an empire to tower over her rejectors. But the deeper truth is more complicated and more human. This isn't a story about a payoff. It's a story about a pivot. That envelope wasn't an ending. It was a brutal, unfair, and involuntary redirect. Amara Jones's power wasn't in accepting the money, but in transmuting its intention. She took an instrument of erasure and used it as a foundation. She converted someone else's assessment of her worth into a completely new metric of her own. For Madame Choi, the world was a ledger of assets and liabilities, of pure lines and managed risks. She believed she was trading capital for control, purchasing a predictable future. What she couldn't account for was the compound interest of human will. She invested in disappearance and yielded a monument. Her attempt to protect a legacy of conformity ultimately catalyzed the creation of its most potent challenger. In the end, the very isolation she enforced became Amara's greatest strength, the freedom to build something entirely original, unburdened by the weight of tradition. For Min-jun, the lesson was about the cost of inheritance. He was groomed to be a steward of a static kingdom, only to discover that the throne felt like a prison. His rebellion was not a sudden explosion, but a slow, strategic dismantling from within. He had to break the machine he was meant to operate, risking everything to even have a chance at a different kind of life. His journey was from successor to sovereign, in the truest sense, claiming the authority to define what his legacy would be. And for Amara, her journey was from being seen as a problem to be solved, to becoming a force that redefines the entire equation. The billboard wasn't a taunt, it was a simple statement of fact. She was here, she existed, and her existence, her success, changed the landscape for everyone who came after. The most powerful rebuke isn't always a shout. Sometimes it's the quiet, undeniable fact of a building where there was once an empty lot. This story leaves us with a lingering question about second acts. Can a relationship, fractured so completely by outside forces and internal betrayals, ever be rebuilt? Not into what it was, but into something new, forged with the wisdom of what was lost. There are no easy answers, only the slow, deliberate work shown in a shared research initiative, in a conversation at a gala, in the patient choice to build a bridge instead of a wall. Perhaps the real victory in any war of the heart is not total conquest, but a negotiated peace where both parties get to keep the parts of themselves that matter most, where the past is acknowledged but not allowed to veto the future. We tell these stories because they mirror our own silent battles, against doubt, against rejection, against the boxes others try to put us in. They remind us that an ending is often just a badly labeled beginning, that the most interesting chapters frequently start on the other side of a door someone else slammed shut. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you of your own pivot or your own quiet defiance, we'd love to hear about it in the comments below. Share your thoughts, your own moments of rebuilding, and if you know someone who needs a reminder that a closed door isn't the end of the road, share this story with them. Thank you for watching. If you haven't already, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. We are here every week with stories about the turning points that define us, the choices that change everything, and the quiet strength it takes to build a life on your own terms. Until next time.